Hello friends, watch my story till end. My name is Samuel Hartley, and this is the one story my soul has carried like a wound for almost 2 decades. This is my truth. For 18 years, every Sunday at sunrise, I walked the same path to the same hillside plot. Not once did I miss a morning. Not for sickness, not for storms, not even for the days I felt too broken to stand. I would kneel beside the grave that held nothing but an empty coffin and the last fragile pieces of the boy I raised. My son vanished when he was 22. A flood swallowed him whole, and the river never gave him back. So I buried what I had left of him, his old glove, his childhood pictures, the books he loved. And I sat there, week after week, speaking to a headstone as if my words could reach whatever world he had gone to. Most mornings ended the same way. Me on my knees, whispering to the earth, my tears soaking into the grass until I had nothing left to shed. But one Sunday, everything changed. I had just placed yellow roses, his favorite, into the metal vase. I leaned forward and whispered the sentence I'd spoken almost every week for 18 years. I miss you. And then, God help me, I heard a voice behind me. A man's voice, trembling, desperate. Dad. At first I thought grief had finally snapped something inside me. I held still, fingers pressed to the cold stone, refusing to turn around. But then the voice spoke again, closer this time, breaking, pleading. And when I finally turned, my son, my dead son, was standing there, alive. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe so more people hear this miracle. Because what happened 18 years ago tore my life apart. It had been raining for 3 straight days. The Valley River rose higher than I'd ever seen in my lifetime. My son called me that afternoon from the construction site where he worked. He said he was helping secure equipment before the water got too high, reassuring me he'd be home soon. Those were the last words I heard from him. Or at least, the last I believe I'd ever hear. Hours later, the dam gave way. I can still hear the roar of it. The sound of a mountain of water ripping through our valley, swallowing buildings, tearing trees out by the roots, sweeping cars as if they weighed nothing. When the wall of water hit the town, it erased everything. Roads, houses, lives. I tried calling him again and again, but the phone kept ringing into nothingness. With the river raging below, I stood on the only piece of high ground left, praying, bargaining, begging God not to take my boy. When the water finally receded 3 days later, it left behind a wasteland of mud and broken things. Entire streets were gone. Families wandered the debris, calling out names, searching for any sign of the people they loved. I joined them. For weeks I walked riverbanks, climbed over shattered houses, and sifted through mud with my bare hands. I called his name until my voice bled raw. Rescue teams came from every corner of the state, but the number of missing kept rising. Bodies surfaced, dozens, then more, but never him. The search teams eventually found his backpack tangled high in a tree miles downstream. The moment I saw it, my legs nearly gave out. I recognized it instantly. I had given it to him as a graduation gift. Inside his wallet, his ruined phone, photographs bent and soaked, but still painfully recognizable. The search commander pulled me aside and spoke gently, the way people speak to a man whose world has already collapsed. He told me the truth I didn't want to hear. The distance that backpack traveled, the condition it was in, it meant my son could not have survived. They warned me that floods often claim bodies that will never be found, dragged under, buried in debris, lost in silt forever. But I didn't accept it. Not at first. Even after the official search was closed, I kept looking, day after day, week after week, until the river felt like an enemy that mocked me with its silence. Eventually, the county issued a death certificate. They had no body, but they had enough evidence. I needed the document for his accounts, his affairs, for closure I didn't want. They told me to hold a funeral, so I did. A funeral with no body, only memories. I filled a coffin with fragments of his life and lowered it into the earth myself. Watching that coffin disappear into the ground was like watching my own heart being buried alive. But I never let that grave become a place of endings. It became the last space where I knew how to be his father. Every Sunday at dawn, I came. Without fail. Rain freezing in my beard. Sun burning the back of my neck. Snow soaking through my knees as I knelt before the stone carved with his name. 18 years. 18 years of flowers. 18 years of whispered stories. 18 years of speaking to someone who could never answer. Or so I believed. Because on that last Sunday, the silence finally broke. And my son, the boy I buried without a body, called out to me from behind. If a grave could talk, what truth would it reveal? For a long moment, I couldn't move. My knees were still pressed into the damp grass, my fingertips frozen against the marble letters of his name. The air felt wrong, too quiet, too sharp, like the world was holding its breath with me. The voice behind me trembled again. Dad, it's really me. I squeezed my eyes shut. 18 years of grief can play vicious tricks on a man. I'd heard his voice in dreams, in half-asleep murmurs, but never standing in the real world behind my back. I told myself this was what happens when sorrow finally swallows your sanity whole. Maybe my mind had reached its limit and began inventing the one thing it knew I wanted most. But then I heard footsteps, real ones, slow, cautious, sinking into the soft morning soil. Dad, please turn around. There was desperation in that voice. Uranus, a familiarity that stabbed straight through my ribs. I finally forced myself to turn, inch by trembling inch, fearing that if I moved too quickly, the illusion would shatter. And then I saw him. A man was kneeling on the grass, barely 10 feet from me. His clothes were worn thin, his hair longer than my boy ever kept it, his face lined and hardened by years I hadn't lived with him. Scars traced his arms, his jawline, the bridge of his nose. But his eyes, God, his eyes, those were my son's eyes. The same warm brown, the same shape, the same quiet depth I had memorized long before he ever knew heartbreak. His breath hitched when our eyes met. His hands shook as he lifted them toward me. Dad, he whispered, voice breaking. It's me. I swear. I'm alive. My mind couldn't catch up. Logic, memory, grief, they all collided in a way that made my vision blur. The grave behind me felt like it was tilting, the world spinning between what I had believed and what stood in front of me. For a moment I thought I might faint, or die, or wake up. But then he stepped closer, and the sunlight touched his face just right, revealing a detail that ripped the breath from my chest. The tiny birthmark under his left eye, the one he tried to hide as a kid because he thought it made him look different. I felt my breath leave me like a punch. I whispered his name, but it came out as a broken sob, barely a sound at all. He nodded, tears spilling freely now. Yes, Dad, it's me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you went through all of this. Those words cracked him open. He covered his face with his hands and cried so hard his whole body shook. That was the moment my paralysis broke. I stumbled toward him, my legs weak and unsteady. I reached out with trembling fingers and touched his arm, testing the reality of him, terrified he would disappear if I blinked. His skin was warm, solid, alive. That single touch destroyed 18 years of certainty. I grabbed him and pulled him to me. He fell into my arms like he'd been waiting a lifetime. We collapsed together into the wet grass, holding each other with the kind of desperation only death, or the illusion of it, could create. His voice shook against my shoulder. I thought you moved on. I thought you forgot me. Forget you. I choked. I visited your grave every Sunday for 18 years. He cried harder, burying his face into my chest like he was the one grieving me. For a long time we stayed like that, father and son, clinging to each other beside a grave that suddenly felt like a cruel joke from the universe. The headstone with his name carved into it stood only feet away. I could see the flowers I had brought that morning still bright and fresh. The date of his death glared back at us like a lie carved in stone. Finally, when our sobs quieted, he pulled back and wiped his face with shaking hands. I wasn't sure you'd believe me, he whispered. I watched you for weeks from the trees. You came every Sunday, just like always. I wanted to come to you sooner, but I was scared. I didn't know if you'd think I was some kind of imposter. I stared at him, unable to comprehend the weight of those words. You were here, watching me. He nodded slowly. For 6 weeks. But I couldn't speak. Not yet. I had to be sure. His voice faltered. I had to be sure you still loved me. That nearly broke me. Son, I whispered, my voice barely a breath. I never stopped loving you. Not for one day. His tears started again, but he fought through them this time, forcing himself to speak. Dad, I didn't die that day. And then he told me what the flood had done to him. He said he remembered the dam breaking, the violent wall of water roaring toward the construction site, swallowing everything in seconds. He remembers trying to run, remembers hitting debris, remembers being pulled under again and again. He remembered thinking he was dying. Then nothing. He woke up days later in a stranger's home, a small farmhouse miles from civilization. A poor family had found him unconscious near a creek. He was battered, starved, bruised, barely alive. And he had no memory. His name, his town, his life. Everything was wiped clean. They took him in because the hospitals were overflowing. The roads were gone. The world was chaos. They cared for him as if he were their own. 17 years passed under a new name, with a new life, an entire existence built on a blank slate. It wasn't until a second accident, years later, that the memories crashed back. My face, our home, the flood, his name, everything, and the guilt. The crushing guilt of realizing his father had buried an empty coffin and mourned him for nearly 2 decades. I didn't know how to find you, he said. No one believed me. Not the police. Not the authorities. Not even your old friends. They all thought I was crazy or a cruel fraud. He tried everything. Then he found the cemetery records. And he came here. Dad, I didn't know if you'd still come after all those years. But when I finally saw you kneel at my grave, his voice cracked. I knew you were still my father. He swallowed hard. And I knew I had to tell you, even if it broke you. We both stared at the stone with his name on it, the grave that marked a life that hadn't ended at all. Reality felt too impossible to hold. My son, my boy who had been dead to the world for 18 years, was sitting beside me in the cold morning light. But every miracle comes with a shadow, and I knew this truth was only the beginning. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, 2 men on damp grass, trying to process a reality too large for breath. My son wiped his face with the back of his hand, then looked at me with an expression that held 17 years of suffering behind it. Dad, you need to know everything, he murmured. Everything that happened after the water took me. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. His hands trembled as he began. He said the flood dragged him miles downstream, through trees, metal, branches, shattered wood. He kept blacking out, gasping for air, swallowing mud, fighting to surface. He said the last thing he remembered was smashing his head into something hard, and then sinking. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die. His voice broke when he said it. The next memory wasn't of hospitals or rescuers, but a dim, warm room in a farmhouse he didn't recognize. He woke up with bandages around his head, a fever burning through him, his body bruised and torn. A family hovered over him. Poor, humble, unfamiliar faces, but faces that cared. They thought I was a stranger swept in from some far-off town, he said. I couldn't even tell them my name because I didn't know it. The words hit me like a hammer. Amnesia. Total, devastating amnesia. He didn't remember our valley. He didn't remember his friends. He didn't remember his job, his past, his childhood. He didn't remember me. That hurt more than I expected, even though I knew he wasn't to blame. He continued speaking, voice low, steady, as if confessing a sin. I woke up empty, a blank slate, like someone had wiped away everything that made me me. The family took him in, not because they had much, but because they couldn't bring themselves to leave a half-dead young man alone. Their home was far from any major town, deep in rural land where news traveled slow and the flood's devastation hadn't even reached their ears. They call me Michael, he said. They needed a name to use, and I didn't have one. Hearing that felt like a blade twisting in my gut. 4 years. Years. He lived under that name, building routines around a life he never chose. He worked their land, helped with chores, mended fences, milked cows, hauled firewood. Not because he wanted to, because he didn't know anything else. I would get flashes, he told me. A voice, a street, a smell, a vague image of someone's silhouette. But it was like trying to hold smoke. Nightmares plagued him. Water closing over his head, rushing currents, drowning. But the memories never aligned clearly until the accident, he whispered. 6 months ago, he had been driving a small truck on a dirt road when a tire blew. The vehicle slid into a ditch, and he hit his head, the same spot that had been injured during the flood. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, he said, "Your face was there." At first he didn't know who I was, just felt a deep, aching familiarity. That face meant something, he said softly, something I had lost. Over the next days, the memories returned like broken shards of glass, sharp, painful, scattered. Slowly, they formed a picture. Our home, his childhood, the flood, the construction site, the call he made to me, and the moment the dam broke. When all came back, Dad, it hit me so hard I thought I was going to lose my mind. He admitted he cried in that hospital bed for hours, crying for the life he lost, for the years erased, for the father who had buried an empty coffin. Once discharged, he told the family the truth. How memories had returned. How he remembered his real name and his real home. How he needed to find his father. They were devastated, he said. They loved me like their own, but they let me go because they knew I didn't belong there. His gratitude for them radiated from every word. If not for them, he would have died 17 years ago. But the world he tried to return to didn't welcome him. He tried contacting the authorities first. Local police stations near our old town. They thought I was insane, he whispered. Or worse, a scammer. He showed them everything he remembered. Faces, places, events, even personal details only my son would know. They told me to leave before they arrested me for impersonation, he said bitterly. One officer even pulled out the death certificate. He's dead, they told him. You're not him. He tried a lawyer. The lawyer said he needed DNA from a living parent, but finding me proved impossible. He searched online for my name, found old addresses, disconnected numbers, outdated records. He tried finding old friends. Most had moved away after the flood destroyed our town. The few who remained looked at him like he was deranged. They told me I was sick for pretending to be someone who died. He whispered. One man threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. He tried hospitals, pastors, county offices. Every door slammed his face. The world had buried me, he said. Legally, socially, completely. He had no proof, no ID, no records, no fingerprint history, no existence. For all purposes, my son had been erased. But then, he searched for something different. Cemetery records. When I saw my own grave listed, the plot number, the hill, he swallowed hard. I knew if you were alive, you'd still be going there. He came every Sunday for 6 weeks, hiding behind trees, watching from a distance. The first 5 Sundays were empty, he said. I thought maybe you had stopped. Maybe you couldn't do it anymore. Maybe you died. His voice scratched into silence. But on the 6th Sunday, I saw you, kneeling, talking, crying over me. He said he broke inside watching that. I wanted to run to you, but fear stopped me. Fear that I'd shatter whatever reality you had left. Fear that seeing me would kill you from shock. Fear that you wouldn't believe I was real. He took a shaky breath. But when I heard you whisper, I miss you, I couldn't stay hidden anymore. That's when he finally stepped out and said the word that resurrected my entire world. Dad. He paused, staring at the headstone behind us. Seeing my own grave, he whispered. It felt like looking at a life I never finished living. We walked to my car after that, me keeping a hand on his arm every second, terrified that this miracle would disappear if I blinked. I drove us to a diner on the edge of town. We sat in a booth in the far back, staring at each other like strangers and family at the same time. He told me about the farm, the people who cared for him, the new name he answered to for nearly 2 decades. the confusion of becoming himself again, the terror of feeling like a ghost in a world that believed he was long gone. And I told him everything he'd missed. The search, the funeral, the empty coffin, the 18 years of Sundays. He cried again, shoulders shaking. "I can't believe you lived with that pain," he whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You didn't do this," I told him. "The river did." He shook his head like he couldn't accept that truth. The days that followed were chaos. We went to the police station again, this time together. They still doubted, questioning us like we were part of some elaborate hoax. But when they compared his face to old photographs, doubt cracked. They ordered DNA testing. Those 2 weeks nearly killed me. Waiting, wondering, trying not to fear the impossible. But the results came back. 99.9% match. My son, alive. Shock rippled through officials, doctors, the coroner who signed the death certificate. They overturned it, restored his legal identity, and suddenly news crews were everywhere. The story spread like wildfire. A man declared dead for 18 years returns to his father's arms. But we hid from cameras. We didn't want scenes. We wanted time. He moved back into the house where he grew up. His room was still exactly as he left it, like a museum frozen in time. He broke down the moment he saw it. "I can't believe you kept everything," he whispered. He told me he needed time to feel like himself again. Time to reconcile Michael with the boy he once was. Time to relearn life outside that farm. Time to be a son again. And I needed time to be a father again. After 18 years of grieving a ghost. We took it slowly. Breakfasts together. Walks. Conversations. Therapy appointments. Quiet moments. Long silences. Healing. He still wakes up crying some nights, drowning in dreams that drag him back under the flood. But now, I'm there. Now he doesn't face those ghosts alone. We visited his grave one last time. Together. We left it untouched. Because that stone marked the years we lost. The years grief kept me alive. The years fate held him captive. It was no longer a tomb, but a memorial to a miracle. And as we stood there, I realized something. Some losses are so powerful. Love refuses to accept them. Some prayers are so desperate. Heaven cannot ignore them. Some stories, and only when God decides to rewrite them. 18 years I mourned my son. And then, one quiet Sunday morning, he walked out of death and back into my life. The weeks after my son came home felt unreal. Like living inside a dream I was terrified to wake from. Every morning, I would open my eyes and look toward the hallway, half expecting him to vanish like mist, half expecting the last 18 years to rush back and crush me all over again. But every morning, he was still there. Some days he'd be in the kitchen, standing quietly with a cup of coffee held in both hands. Other days he'd be sitting on the porch, staring at the sunrise like someone trying to memorize a world he'd forgotten. And sometimes, when I walked past his door, I'd hear him crying softly into his pillow, trying to smother the sound. He was 40 years old now, a grown man. But inside, he was still the 22-year-old boy who vanished in a storm. The day we got the DNA results was the moment the world itself had to accept what my heart already knew. The police stared at the paper like it rewrote the laws of life and death. Even the medical examiner, the same man had declared my son dead, stood speechless when the numbers proved the impossible. My son was alive. Not a duplicate. Not a scam. Not a case of mistaken identity. He was mine. News spread faster than wildfire on a dry hillside. Reporters camped outside my home. Cars lined the street. Photographers tried to snap pictures through the windows. They called it a miracle, a resurrection, a scientific mystery, a once-in-a-lifetime story. But for me, it was simply the return of my boy. We refused interviews. We kept our doors closed. My son couldn't handle crowds. Even headlights at night made him flinch. The world wanted excitement, wonder, spectacle, but we were just trying to breathe. The bureaucratic nightmare that came next was something no father prepares for. My son had been legally dead for nearly 2 decades. That meant he had no bank account, no driver's license, no social security record that matched a living person. Everything had been shut down, erased, archived under deceased. To the system, He was a ghost returning to life. His identity had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Agencies argued. Institutions hesitated. The IRS demanded explanations. The DMV insisted they had no procedure for undeclaring someone dead. Insurance companies called constantly. Social Security pushed paperwork back and forth like they were afraid to touch it. But slowly, painfully, one document at a time, he came back to the world. During those months, we spent hours talking, sometimes until sunrise, sometimes in total silence, sometimes through tears, sometimes through laughter so fragile it sounded like it might break. He told me about the family who had saved him, simple people, living quietly far from the noise of civilization. They had taken him in not because they understood who he was, but because they couldn't leave a dying man on a riverbank. They didn't ask for anything, he said. Not once. Not for money. Not for answers. They just took care of me. He showed me photos of them on his phone. A tired-looking couple with kind eyes, children now grown into adults, a small farmhouse surrounded by fields. I felt a wave of gratitude, so deep it nearly brought me back to tears. I need to meet them, I told him, and I meant it, because without them, I would have buried more than an empty coffin. I would have buried him for real. But he wasn't ready for that visit yet, and I understood. He had lived as Michael for 17 years. A borrowed name, a borrowed life. Learning to be himself again took time and courage. He would walk through the house, noticing things he should have remembered. Pictures, furniture, books, the dent on the hallway wall where he crashed his bike at 13. Sometimes he'd stop, touch a surface, and close his eyes like trying to summon the missing years back into his bones. It feels familiar, he said once, but also foreign, like I'm walking through someone else's memory. Trauma does that, splits you between who you were and who you had to become. He went to therapy twice a week. Nightmares woke him often. Images of water rising, the roar of a dam breaking, branches scraping his skin, the suffocating blackness beneath the flood. He'd wake gasping for air, clawing at his sheets like the river still had him. But I was there now. I brought water, held his shaking hands, told him he was safe, told him I was never leaving him again. Sometimes he apologized for waking me. Sometimes he apologized for being alive. Sometimes he apologized for a pain he never caused. I'd stop him every time. No, I'd say, not 1 second of this is your fault. But grief leaves scars on both sides of the story. One evening, he asked a question so soft, I almost didn't hear it. Did you ever stop visiting my grave? I told him the truth. I visited every Sunday. Every single one. For 18 years. His lips trembled. He wiped his eyes. And for a while, we sat quietly with the weight of those lost years between us. Later that month, I took him back to church with me. I hadn't stepped inside that building in over a decade. I had lost faith the day my son disappeared. I had prayed until my knees ached, begged until my voice cracked, and still the river had taken him from me. But sitting there beside him, feeling his presence beside me like a second heartbeat, I realized something I had refused to believe for years. God didn't take my son. God preserved him, carried him to a place where he could survive, and returned him when the time was right. I prayed for the first time in 18 years, not for a miracle, but in gratitude for one. As weeks turned into months, my son started finding pieces of himself again. His voice changed, softened. His laugh returned, hesitant at first, then fuller. He started helping around the house, cooking meals, fixing things, stepping back into a rhythm he thought he'd lost forever. But the most difficult moment of all was the day we returned to the cemetery, together. We walked slowly up the hill where his grave still stood, untouched. The headstone had weathered storms, snow, wind, and 18 years of my grief. The flowers still grew around it, some planted by me, some by strangers who had read his story in the news. My son stood in front of the stone that bore his name, and the date the world believed he died. He went silent, completely silent. I didn't say anything, didn't push, didn't comfort. I just stood beside him, letting him feel whatever rose inside him. After a long time, he spoke. That's the life I didn't get to finish, he whispered. The life I should have lived. The one time buried. His voice trembled. But this This is the life I get to start again. I told him we could remove the grave if he wanted. Erase it. Close the chapter physically as well as emotionally. But he shook his head. No, leave it. It's a reminder of what we survived. We placed fresh yellow roses at the base of the headstone. One last gesture of closure for the life he never got to live. On the way home, he reached over and held my arm, just like he used to when he was a little boy and the world scared him. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. The past 18 years have been built on pain. The next 18 would be built on healing. He told me he wants to visit the farm someday, to hug the people who saved him, to tell them he loves them, to thank them for raising him when I couldn't. He told me he wants to work again, drive again, live again. And every day I watch him take another small step into the world he lost. For him, those steps are victories. As for me, I am no longer the man who knelt in the cold for 18 years, begging a stone for answers. I am a father again, reborn with the son I thought I had buried. I don't know why destiny wrote our story this way. I don't know why grief had to carve a hole in me, so deep it almost swallowed my soul. But I do know this. Sometimes the dead return. Sometimes love calls across 18 years of silence. Sometimes miracles walk up behind you on a Sunday morning and whisper, "Dad." And sometimes God gives back the very thing you thought was gone forever.